So today we have a live chat box with special guests who are able to answer your questions as we work through today's content. We have Alistair Grant, the General Manager, Workplace Rehab and Health at ORS Group, and Susie Staten from Reshaping Wellbeing, and she's also an accredited Judgment Index consultant. We also have Amanda Stevenson, who's a State Manager for WA, Workplace Rehabilitation and Health, ORS Group. Thank you guys for being in the chat box. So feel free to type in any questions and they can jump in as needed. So firstly, let's take a look at some terminologies. So we've got psychosocial hazards. So this is anything that could cause psychological harm, could be in the design or management of work, including interpersonal relationships. Psychological safety is the belief that we're safe to take interpersonal risks within our team. And psychological health and safety is the promotion of well-being and the aim to actively prevent harm. It's very important as we work through. And also just a quick outline of Judgment Index before I get started, as I realise some of you may not have come across us before. So we are a short online 15-minute values-based assessment. It's unlike the majority of the assessments out there in the market that are psychometric based. Our research is backed by Nobel Prize nominated Dr. Robert Hartman, who founded the study of axiology. And for the geeks in the room who like stats and maths and data, I'm more than happy to share further information following the webinar. We've got plenty of validation studies that we can share quite easily. But what we measure is values, and values are the lens through which we see the world, and it evolves over time. So it's how we use our values that help inform our decisions. And when we're looking at psychosocial hazards, it's all really about decision making, from our company led decisions around job design, strategy, and process, through to decisions from local managers as to how they lead and develop others, right down to the individual's day to day decisions and priorities. And this is where psychosocial hazards are traditionally difficult to predict and prevent. So it comes down to truly understanding your people and their value system. And so you can make informed data led decisions to assess, prevent, and review the psychosocial hazards in your workplace. So the actual impacts of psychosocial hazards, I'm sure everyone's aware about the legislation changes that are coming into play as of the 1st of April. If you need more information on that, please go to your regulatory agent in your state. And Alistair, could I also get you to add some links in the comment box for anyone who needs it? But apart from legislation, the impact is actually more important than this. So turnover, if you have unresolved or poorly managed psychosocial hazards in the workplace, naturally your turnover rate will be higher. Culture, poorly managed psychosocial hazards will negatively impact the culture within an organisation, and people will struggle to be their best self from a poor culture environment. Higher stress and lower well-being, people can't perform at their best level when they're under stress and struggling to support themselves. And even your management team, they can't manage appropriately if they're under stress. But we also have the workers' compensation cost, and that's probably the more timely factor at the moment. But did you know that psychosocial claims are longer, more time consuming, and have a much higher cost than physical injury claims? So what can we do to best identify issues and support the well-being of our organisation to work to prevent psychosocial injuries? So today we're going to talk about using the identification of values in 3 stages. From recruitment, to be able to understand your new hires as early in the piece as possible. Development, to strengthen the well-being of your workforce, including your leaders. And leadership, how to use data to drive targeted responses to get a better return on investment for strategies that you're implementing. So firstly, recruitment. This is all about understanding who you're hiring. So what is their personal value system and are they suited to your industry? Because each industry has its own challenges. Some challenges can be adjusted with alternative processes, but there's going to be industries which are always going to have certain risks. So you need to identify the right people from the start and support them appropriately from day one. One of our larger clients started using Judgment Index for recruitment about 7 years ago now. So turnover was an issue, and the industry itself was known to be a stressful environment. They're working with difficult people on a regular basis, and the HR team conducted a review into the indicators that looked at the comparative data for turnover with the organisation. And what they actually identified was two separate indicators which had a 100% turnover rate within 6 months of commencing at the company. And obviously, these people that were starting weren't suitable for the industry and didn't have the right support. So, through the assessment, they then adjusted some of the recruitment processes, but they also implemented targeted supports for new starters. The turnover rate decreased by 20%, but interestingly, they also had a 100% reduction in workers' compensation claims. And these claims were predominantly stress related and had been very difficult for the company to manage. But with the new focus on getting to understand their new employees and having better strategies, it flowed on through to well-being, and workers' compensation claims dropped dramatically as a result, which was great. But making a recruitment decision comes down to a number of factors. So you've got your references, your resume, your interview, past experience of who's worked and who hasn't, and judgment index can often be just a part of that. So we have industry and role reports which have targeted interview questions that can help a hiring manager to drill down further into a person's value system and develop and discuss any indicators that may pose a hazard in the future. Because we all know that everyone's nice in an interview, and how many times have your managers or even yourself hired someone to only have everything unravel a few months down the track? And what our assessment does is it brings those quality conversations about potential hazards through to the interview stage so your hiring manager can discuss those properly and best understand who they're hiring. And when you have a large company with lots of different hiring managers, it also helps create some consistency as to how well they're understanding hazards and the potential hazards. So, Adam Grant talks a lot about soft skills, and the Judgment Index really gives you a way to measure the soft skills, because if you can't measure it, how are you going to improve it or validate it? And often soft skills, yeah, as he says, they're the hardest to master, they're the hardest to train as well. So the Judgment Index is really a tool to validate your recruitment decisions and to improve the conversations with an applicant to find out more information than they wouldn't necessarily disclose without the prompting questions. So it's often a surprise to managers when someone has been super nice in an interview and they've said all the right things. A few months down the track, issues start to occur, things start to unravel. But what our assessment does is it puts the potential for hazards right at the forefront so you can identify these easily and put in clear strategies to support your employee. So let's take a look at John's assessment here. He's interviewing with an organisation that provides community based support through the NDIS. So he's going out to homes, he's out in the community, lots of different work environments. Often he's a lone worker as well. He's experienced at this, he's been a support worker for other companies, he's worked in the industry before. His references were good and he has a good work history. So he's a pretty strong candidate. But when we're looking at his judgment index report, and this is one specific for the care sector, there are a few indicators highlighting a risk around potential psychosocial hazards which can be explored by the hiring manager. And we'll look at one in particular, and this is probably one that everyone's picked up on already, but work-related stress. So work-related stress for John, being a lone worker, working out in the community, that could be a major hazard. But you might find out when discussing his past history with him that his previous workplace might have had limited support. They might have placed him in precarious positions. His manager might not have been around. He may have had limited control over how he could manage those risks. So he's now at your doorstep looking for a new employer who prioritizes and values their people. So this report isn't necessarily saying don't hire John. This is about saying, let's understand what hazards or what difficulties John might have in the workplace so we can do something about it. And the great thing about this report is that there's also specific interview questions which are customized to each report. So the hiring manager can have strong and quality conversations to further explore potential psychosocial hazards so that they can make an informed choice about whether John is going to be suitable for the role, but the industry as well. And these are some of the indicators that we can measure at the recruitment stage. We can measure lots. These are just a couple. But self-criticism, for example. So when we're hard on ourselves, and I'm sure every single one of us could agree that we're our own hardest critic. I know I am. But when this is out of balance and isn't managed appropriately or used within a healthy perspective, it can turn into negative self-talk. And what we have seen is, especially if it's a manager with high self-criticism, it can be expressed through being overcritical of others. And that in itself is a psychosocial hazard that we need to understand. So let's move on to development. So this is about supporting the well-being of your workforce because we know that developing your people from ground level through all the management levels is critical to not only retaining a strong team, but also preventing psychosocial injury. Often we promote our high performers into management roles without putting in plan in place for them to understand their own strengths and development areas. And if they don't understand themselves, how are they meant to support their team? So if you have a think about your own company, are your managers having to head into difficult conversations? Are they having to have these difficult conversations with staff? And how prepared are they? Do they have the appropriate skills to be able to have these in a positive way? Or is this a hazard within your own organization? So when we're talking about development and well-being, it's beyond yoga. It's beyond the fruit in the lunchroom. It's about seeing well-being as how you do business from all levels, and it's a multifaceted company-wide strategy to support the people within your business. So, John, we previously looked at John. We know that he may have less capacity to handle workplace stresses and is likely to need more support from his manager. But he is working in a community based role. He's not going to have access to his manager all the time. So, things that we might need to put in place for John could be looking at his blue diamond and personal narrative. This is one of our larger wellbeing and self development tools. We'd also put in a solid learning and development plan that he can work alongside his manager with from day one. So we're not waiting for issues to happen, we're proactively preventing them. We're going to ensure that John's manager has the time and the capacities to support him because we know he's going to need a bit of extra support. And we're also going to link John in with an EAP provider. Again, we're not waiting for things to happen. John now has some good self awareness. He knows he needs some strategies to cope with stress. And because he's got more self awareness, we also might find that our HR staff are in a better position to move into a more coaching role with John. So, what then happens for John is that he feels supported from day one with your organization. So, what was originally a potential psychosocial hazard is now an opportunity for John to build on his own well-being, but also improving his potential for success within his role and to be his best self. This is a good quote. This is Amy Edmondson is from Harvard Business School and author of a book called The Fearless Organization, which is all about psychological safety. And her interpretation is basically the biggest risk to an organization is the nearest boss. So if you're thinking about your management team and your leaders within a company, how well how well can they prevent psychosocial hazards and manage these within your organization? Because manager behavior as a psychosocial hazard can impact in a variety of ways. Things like decision making, poor communication, which could result in bullying claims, micromanagement behaviors, even decreased productivity from the manager on their own. And as an organization, how are you supporting your managers to best understand themselves, their behavior, and how to appropriately handle all the challenges that happen in the workplace? The judgment index can actually be used as an alternative to a 360. It's yeah, a much easier way of getting that feedback to a manager with little confrontation. So, finally, let's move on to leadership. So, here we talk about understanding the makeup of your organization. And this is all about, un- as we know, psychosocial safety is a company wide approach. And organizations need to be looking at the processes within their organization to help support and guide their employees. We actually have a free worksheet on our website that you're able to download today, which outline factors for success within any organization. It's a good one to just review when things get a little bit tricky. Um, and our leadership, so our company-wide reports, we can assess whether there's gaps in your organization in terms of handling stress, how empathetic your organization is, the well-being score, and it's great to get an overall picture as well. So these are some of our organisational level reports where you can easily review a large number of people at one time to get a clear understanding of where your company fits. And being able to use group reports to make decisions within your company just improve the return on investment. So if you're investing in a change, you want to make sure that works, and being able to understand the people and your organisation as a whole will just ensure that you're able to implement things better. So you could do things like reviewing a team or department where there's high turnover and look at any specific issues that there might be, assess a team's compatibility with their own manager, but also helping to identify barriers to company-wide change. So, for example, one of our long-term clients was doing a major company restructure. They are a services company, and they'd heavily promoted from within, which a lot of companies do. What happened though was that they ended up with a number of senior leaders who may not have been the best choice for the role. They hadn't been supported to understand areas of development that they needed to work on. Um, they'd, they'd been promoted because they were high performers in the organization. So the company decided to do a complete restructure and needed to do a spill and fill. But the CEO was determined that humanity and their people were going to be at the forefront of the process. So we assessed the leadership team across the organisation and provided a report similar to the one on the left here, which outlined some of the stronger managers with values that were more aligned with what the organisation was looking for. It also identified managers who were likely to struggle with the change and would benefit from a more supportive and coaching approach from people and culture. So, what they did was they implemented development plans for anyone who didn't receive an offer of a management position. And the resounding feedback from the team was that they felt supported throughout what they knew was a difficult time for the company, but also for themselves. So the hazard was managed by keeping people as a priority within the huge business change. And the reward to the company was that they were actually able to retain long-standing employees. I think it was a 96% retention rate for managers through a spill and fill, which, is pretty much unheard of. And the employees that were involved in the change and involved in the restructure were really happy with how the organisation handled it. So, if we can summarize the three areas that you can work on today to best identify psychosocial hazards, we need to recruit with greater insight. So, understanding from day one who you have coming in through the door. We want to be developing and fostering a workplace where people thrive. So, truly wanting your workforce to understand themselves and to also have this insight so they're in control of their own journey. But finally, leading with data to enhance company decisions. If you're aware of a potential hazard and can proactively support your team to handle change or to manage stress, it's only going to enhance your company mission and improve your return on investment.
Some of the key things that sort of popped out for me and in my lived experience, just to give people a bit more time and opportunity to engage if they so choose to, is that I have been working with a utilities company, taking a group of senior leaders through a leadership development review. So again, the organisation really at that development stage had decided that they wanted to put in a whole support network, which was about employee experience. And the attention that they wanted to give on their individuals started with a judgment index Blue Diamond report, a one-on-one session, which would enable each of those individuals to have a look at those results. And because it's not self-reporting tool, it is actually a deductive reasoning tool. It is the individual whom's is actually giving themselves their own understanding of what it is that they value most. And it's the conversations that, as Petrina mentioned, about the difference between 360 and somebody telling me that they don't like something about myself or the way that I'm showing up, versus actually enabling an individual to come to their own conclusions that that's how it might be showing up for them, because you're presenting them with a report that actually they're the ones that put together the two ranking of those two sets of 18 statements and gave us the validation of the report and the way that they see the world. So yes, it's been a lot less confrontational in terms of conversations with each of those leaders, but the empowerment aspect is something that I absolutely love and am passionate about with regards to the use of this tool. And so, yes, I just wanted to add that while we had the opportunity to allow people to have a bit of a conversation.
So we have a question from Jacinta Rowe, who has a situation where they've got a person who's been promoted well beyond their capability, but they don't have any insight into their limitations and development needs, and are refusing to acknowledge that they may need to work on an aspect of their leadership or their own value system. So that's quite common. Actually, Susie, this is your expertise here. I've popped in it the Blue Diamond and Personal Narrative Report is perfect. It's non-confrontational and provides really clear information. But do you want to add in anything there as well?
Yeah, well, the other thing that I'm picking up there, in particular with regards to Jacinta's comment, is that they've tried external reports. So given that that's a specific example, I'd love to have an offline conversation with you about what did or didn't work in regards to those external reports, to give you an understanding of whether or not the use of the judgment index will help you fill those gaps, or where potentially. So we use the judgment index reporting is actually utilised in combination with a number of different other reports. And again, we've got some validation and some documentation that can show you where the overlay can actually provide a more of a holistic approach to engaging with your people. So, you know, some organisations, for example, might take a DISC approach, and that's something that they've just always done. But then they overlay that with the judgment index, and it just helps to fill those gaps that they can't identify through the psychometric based testing. That's, as Petrina indicated, is the majority of what's external reports are available to date. So it might be more of an individual conversation that we need to go through. Certainly at the other end of the spectrum, and to be brutally frank, We can't make people, regardless of the information, take it on. So there are other aspects that may need to be taken into account in regards to the overall HR processes, which I can't comment on at this point in time. But again, we can certainly put you in contact with some experts in that aspect in regards to legislative and requirements about processing and managing from a HR administration perspective. But yeah, we can take that offline, Jacinta, if you like. But in terms of the way that I've addressed it with an individual where I've shown them their Blue Diamond report, because the Blue Diamond report has this concept, it has a clear delineation of a self side as well as a work side. It really gives us an opportunity to talk about what's under the hood and what might be driving someone's inability to actually fulfill their potential. So that's often where I get people to start to go, oh, now I get it. I'm starting to see the link between this behaviour and this in what's happening in terms of my sense of self. So yeah, that's probably the summary version that I could give you in terms of just generics.
Cool.
I
Might
can
just
probably weigh in on the top of that as well, Katrina. Like, I think depending on people in the room, there might be a lot of people interested in what psychosocial safety will mean for them in terms of next steps. There's lots of principles coming out now suggesting that this was going to be legislative. There's expectations that employers manage this with a lot more detail and care, which there will be ramifications like increasing psychological claims. A lot of the national data's hinting at that and showing that. So I think the advantage here as well is kind of pointing to what Susie was talking to about non-confrontational information, being able to sort of look under the hood and maybe understand where things didn't quite go right for this person at the time, where the misalignment may have existed, and then how you can actually come back from that. Because typically what we have seen, as your data indicated, is when psychological claims are lodged, they're 3 times as costly, they're 3 times as long, they're really difficult to pry out. And it's because there's that inability to have a very good non-confrontational conversation, allows us to look under the hood and actually have a critical appraisal with that person in collaboration. So speaking from a rehab provider's point of view, who helps people get back on track after having damages of psychosocial safety, I think that's another aspect of where JI is super effective. Because it allows you to look with a different lens. You're looking at that person not from a purely health focus, which a lot of our schemes direct us to do, but we actually look at them from a values focus, which is a really nice bit of work. And I think it's something that probably hasn't been pried into very much by the market. So recently I spoke at a National Workers' Comp Summit, and the question that was posed is what preventative measures could we put in place? And I really encourage the attendees in that room to look at, go beyond your lag indicators, what your EAP utilization is like, your number of claims you're having, your staff attritional rates. The horse has bolted there. It's very difficult to sort of work with that, and the data tells us it. So trying to use more lead indicators, and some of the examples you gave are prime opportunities for us to minimize the rates of claim. And you obviously gave your example of that one employer that dropped claims by 100%, which is, I think most of us in this room would think that's a phenomenal outcome and would take that with open hands. So yeah, I think that's probably the part that I would come at it from a dealing with sometimes more on that reactive side.
And I think obviously EAP as a strategy can be used, but often by the time people get to EAP, as you said, the horse is bolted as well. So potentially using EAP as one of the preventative strategies as well. Where we've actually have a free worksheet for everyone who's joined us that can download. It's just about successful outcomes and when they occur. So feel free to jump on our website.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and the information in regards to the use of the Judgment Index through some specific examples that I can also attest to, given my own use of the tool, as I said, with a range of industry both from the not-for-profit all the way through to large-scale corporates, utility companies, etc. So again, please, anyone on the call, if you're interested in furthering the conversation and or having a look at the judgment index and some of the reports that might be available to help you manage psychosocial hazards, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, everyone.